I wrote to Perth Repertory Theatre for years asking if I could work there. And then when I was 16, I did 6 weeks of my 5th year. So I had 2 years to go. I had my 5th year and then my 6th year, and then I thought I would be allowed to leave school because it was finished. But my mum and my dad, I was very unhappy about this point. I was getting in trouble a lot at school, and my mum and dad said to me one night that I could leave if I wanted to, and I never thought for a moment about it. It never crossed my mind. And so that night, I said, yes, I'm going to leave school. I was half-term, the first half-term back, and I never went back to school after that. And so I wrote to Perth Repertory Theatre and said, please let me work for you. And we got the usual letter back saying, you have to train, you had to, you know, I wanted to work in the stage crew. They said, well, you had to have trained as a stage manager or as an actor. You can't, you know, there's no jobs. I think it was mainly because I was still very young. I was just 16, you know. And but the week I left school, or the week my parents said you can leave if you like, I wrote to them, and my mum phoned them, I think, on my behalf. And that week they were starting rehearsals for Passage to India, and they needed Indians to be running around, and the director wanted the Indians to be kind of running around the back of the auditorium and using the whole theatre, so not just the stage. And so she needed, it was Joan Knight, she's a very famous director, she's dead now, but she was a very famous kind of grand lady director, and certainly in my part of the world. And so they needed extras, and so they said, okay, he can come and be an Indian. So I had to put on, kind of darken my skin a bit and wear a turban and run around the stage, and I got to act on stage in a professional play, you know. And I because I was doing that, they asked me, you know, I had to help with scene changes, and I think I helped even put the set on the stage for the first time. And I was so keen, and probably very annoying to the other actors, but terribly keen and very full of myself. I remember having a conversation with Kenny Glennan and saying I'd never do an advert, and I'd never do a soap opera, and they were working actors. They were going, God, I'd give anything to have an advert, I'd give anything to be in EastEnders or something. But at the time I had a very high horse, which I still have, I think. And but it was there I started to learn about what I really wanted to do, which was acting. And I feel like my life changed that first day I walked in there. I stood on the stage, and the director, Joan Knight, was in the darkness. You couldn't see her, and she was like, darling, could you move to the left? And I didn't know which darling she was talking to. Am I a darling? I didn't assume that I would be the darling, you know. And but it was wonderful, and I started being able to watch professional actors in the wings. I watched them from the wings. I could watch them warm up. I learned about stage management, what they did. I had no idea, you know. I think most of all I learned about the discipline of the theatre, that to make this magic happen on stage, there's a very strong discipline required backstage and in the wings. And people, I was able to watch actors through rehearsal and be amongst them on stage while they rehearsed. And for 6 months I worked at Perth Rep, and it was the best thing that happened to me. It was really, it set me on my way, you know. There I heard about this one-year theatre arts course in Fife, in Kirkcaldy, that I went and I auditioned there. I auditioned in another theatre arts course in Telford College in Edinburgh, and I was accepted in both, and I chose to go to Kirkcaldy because I thought it sounded like the better course to me. I mean, who knows? And I had a great year there. It was a very good year, very hard, because there we had to do stage management, we had to act, we had to do everything, make the costumes, publicise the show, and we had to put four different shows on a year. One of them being in schools. We did a schools tour about racism, a play that we devised ourselves about racism.
You toured that around schools
in Scotland.
Right.
I mean, not all over Scotland, but I think in Fife certainly. I think for a week or 2 weeks we toured it to different schools, and it was good. You know, at the time, our director Lynn Baines knew about racism. She'd seen it with her son, and there was a kind of myth that there wasn't any racism in Scotland at the time. You know, we're not racist up here, but she'd had bricks through her window, and you know, and so it's very clearly that there are, you know, and I think that's what's very powerful about theatre and education, is because children are so very powerful. You know, if if they see a play that tells them something that they weren't aware of before, like racism or whatever it be, you know, it makes a huge impact in the world later on when they grow up. Like I see it with I've seen it in 2 instances recently that have really touched me. One was in Africa, in Malawi. I went to Malawi with UNICEF, and I spent a week going around the different parts of the country, seeing how AIDS and HIV had affected that country. And at the end of it, I watched this little theatre troupe arrived in this village I was at, and they put on a play about HIV and AIDS, about how you get it, how not to get it, and what to do if you get it, and everything that we'd seen with our own eyes was incorporated into this funny play with very larger-than-life characters. And there was maybe 4 or 5, you know, I'd say teenage to maybe 24 or 5-year-old actors in the play. And I watched all these tiny little kids watching the play in this dusty village in Africa. And I thought about my daughter, who knows an awful lot about the environment now. My eldest daughter's 9, and she comes home and she tells me so many things about the environment that she's learned at school that I didn't get taught when I was at school. So I know that her generation are going to be far more careful with the planet than we've been, you know. And I thought about these African kids in this village, that whereas now, you know, AIDS is a terrible problem there, whereas because people don't really know how you get it or what to do if you get it, whereas all these children are watching this play and they do know now, so when they grow up, you know, it'll have a huge effect on the world. It'll make less people will get AIDS because these kids from the age of 2, 3, 4, 5 know all about it, whereas before we didn't know anything about it. So I think it plays a really strong, and our little play about racism, you know, maybe I found in when we would tour in schools, there was always a bunch of guys at the back who were the kind of the hard guys, you know, who thought it was all just a load of rubbish and didn't care, and at the time it used to really upset me, and now I don't care about them, because I think for most of the audience of kids, they're quite into it. You know, it's a special event when actors come to the school and suddenly put on a play in the school gym or the school theatre or the hall or whatever it is. It's an event, and for the majority of the kids watching, I think they're really keen to see it and listen and take it on. I think kids love it. They take on board theatre really well. It's very well suited to them. It's better than the telly.